even being
It
able
is-
to make a snowman.
It does have ice in it, yeah. Stephanie, you're the host now.
He doesn't like me being on Zoom calls talking without him having viewing rights.
Stephanie,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna have you run the slideshow and just say slide advance. Is that okay?
Uh-huh. I'm doing all the slides except for Megan Lampkin. So all
Just
before
making sure.
break. So you could say advance, whatever you want to say. Stephanie, you can just say whatever you want to say to advance. I'll try to keep up because we practiced.
So it looks like we may have a few minutes because I'm looking at my Zoom meeting with them, and it looks like it doesn't start till 1:15. Even
This
though we
doesn't start
sent,
till 1:15?
yeah, it says on my, like the title of this group that we meet every other week, but it's not the same Zoom meeting. You know what I mean? Like I have the workshop from 1 to 3, but then I have this other one. So that may be why people are, let me text around.
Oh, that's okay. We can use I mean, everybody can use the bio break or lunch. I know I could use the lunch.
My meeting has everybody on it and it's set for 1 o'clock. So everybody should have gotten this.
Okay. Hey, Susan.
Because when
Here we go.
I was gonna send you all an email based on it, and I was almost just gonna send it to everybody saying, join me, I opened it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be right back.
All right.
Jason, your cat looks very comfortable.
This is like an hourly occurrence. I don't know how, I mean, the mistake I made was that I went in the other room and was petting him, and then I came in here, and so he'll follow me.
What's his name?
Kofi, Kofi.
Kofi. I was married to a guy named Kofi.
Were you? So it's a Ghanaian name.
Yes, it is.
Or West African, I should say, but I know it from Ghana.
Yeah, Asante.
Yeah. You know, do you know the derivation of all those names by any chance? You probably do.
Yeah, they're weekdays.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really cool because you get 7 options for the women and you get 7 options for the men.
And that's it.
And I'm like,
you
that's
only have
kinda
14
cool.
people in your class.
Is that like the day they were born? Like Monday, Tuesday?
Yeah, the day of the week that you were born.
Friday.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Kofi Owusu Boateng.
And they're super common names because there's a lot of people that literally use, I mean, sometimes you just get called almost like somebody would shorten your name and abbreviate it by your day of the week. But a lot of people actually have taken those names as their legal first name as well. Do you mind?
That's cool.
This one. Yeah, I see you.
I've been not coming until just right at 1, huh?
I was going to share, I've been watching 3-minute thesis competition presentations for UC like a lot this morning and yesterday, and they're so good.
What was it you saw?
Do you know about the 3-minute thesis competition?
No.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a global competition and UC participates. It's for graduate students. So they have to basically convey their research in 3 minutes using
elevator speech. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, they're really good.
Well, elevator speech wouldn't be that long, but that'd be a really slow elevator.
Is this for the undergrads or
graduate students?
Hosted by the graduate school.
Yeah, yeah.
If there might maybe some people in this group, or do you know anyone, Megan, in the T32 group that competed?
Not to my knowledge. Susan, do you know anyone?
It would have been Christelle, Chanel, and Kyle. And I think Kyle may have won the presentation, overall presentation for everybody. But I can't remember if that was this last competition they had with the graduate school or what.
Yeah, we're evaluating right now. So
okay.
Winners for this year haven't been addressed, but yeah. I feel like that Kyle one is familiar.
You know, Kyle Furchin,
Is he neuroscience?
He's in cancer biology.
Okay, this would have been different, yeah.
Oh, I already went through this slide. Sorry.
So I noticed one of my slides like had a lot of me talking through it. So I just split it into two of the same slide, but emphasize some of the words. Is that going to mess you up, Stephanie?
No, because you're going to share your slide.
Yeah,
You're going to share them.
Well, everybody, just so you know, if you're following along on your own set and all of a sudden I show the exact same thing, but with different words, just follow along.
I'm going to stop you and say start over.
Can't do it. No.
How do we see people coming in? I see Megan waving at people.
Yeah. Let me
watch your participant list. You'll see that they're knocking.
In the upper right hand corner, there's a little button that says view.
Yeah.
And if you click on it, you can pick about gallery view and you should be able to see at least a few folks.
Or your grid view. I know I have this back down, but if those are people that are here, if you could update. Oh, good, Carolyn. You traveled well. So
Oh, you're muted.
Yes. You made it? Here, unmute yourself. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Carolyn.
You made it in. You
Hey, Jack.
made it in from somewhere, and the snow didn't prevent you from getting here.
Well, I'm actually in Salt Lake City still.
Oh no.
Right, so I'm supposed to fly out this afternoon, so I will probably I may have to leave early because it's snowing like mad here and I have to get to the airport.
Well, yeah. Just saw your early morning email too, or last night's email. So yes, this will be recorded, Carolyn. Don't worry. We're recording now. But as we're getting started, everyone, if you wouldn't mind updating your pronouns. Let me go back to updating your pronouns. If everybody doesn't know how to do that, if you look at where you have three little dots next to where you have mute or unmute, you can click on that to rename yourself. And you can just put your first name because it seems like everybody knows each other here, except for maybe the presenters may not know you. And then update your pronouns. So holler if you need some help. So you hit that, go over your picture basically. Click on the three little dots next to mute. You should see all the different options. You can even spotlight yourself for everyone, just kidding. And then rename, and I'm just gonna do Stephanie.
Let's also cover the annotation notes as well.
Okay. Megan, did she, are we confirming as everyone's coming in that we are starting at 1:15 because of communication with the T trainees, or since you said your calendar had it at 1:15?
Yeah, hey, Carolyn and Susan, do you guys, I know we sent out the email for this to start at 1, but I think people are logging in for the 1:15 start time because that's our typical. Have you heard from anyone?
No, I'm going to send an email right now. That's what I'm doing.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm
We've
just
got
going
a
to
good
turn
number
that.
of people already, though. There's 15 of us
know.
already, so.
And I'm going to go ahead and make sure, sorry about that. I have to admit, this is our first time with the live transcript, so apologies as I'm getting used to it as your host. But I'm going to take off the waiting room so everyone can just come on in.
Oh.
So if you're just coming in and you need to update, there we go. Looks like, thank you, Jack. Looks like everybody's updating their pronouns. Thank you.
Sit down. Sit.
And thanks, Cope, for welcoming everyone in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and just say hi. It's one of those crazy days with a Cincinnati blizzard, and Carolyn's still out in Salt Lake City. So,
Has it stopped snowing yet?
oh,
Almost.
Fitting.
It's working on stopping.
yes,
Because
it stops and starts again, Carolyn.
Yeah, it's certainly not very much right now. It's just flakes blowing around.
right. How are they doing on the roads? Are the roads plowed?
The roads are pretty clean, except whatever roads you want to drive on. Then they will not have been plowed. That's
How's
what I found.
MLK? Is
All roads
MLK
are clean
better?
except the
It's
ones
okay
you're
now.
driving on.
MLK fine.
I am supposed to get to CVG at like 11:30 tonight. And so I will have the pleasure of digging out my car at midnight. Ah, right.
Yeah,
Oh.
it will take some digging. There's quite a bit of snow
Right.
there.
It's more the ice. I think you're going to have an issue.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Picking the ice off of your windshield.
Plus the temperature is supposed to drop to single digits like after dark tonight.
Yes,
Yeah.
all good things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Just stay where you are.
Yeah.
Seriously.
We're like 10 minutes from CBG and we got about 5 inches here plus ice. So
Maybe I'll buy a cigarette lighter in the air. Well, to heat my car key so that the lock's all.
That's a good
Well,
idea.
Oh, that's an old Alaskan idea.
That's better than sticking your car keys in your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We only got about 3 inches in blue ash, I would say.
Oh, really?
Well,
Mhm.
see whether they can land the plane in blue ash. It'll be much easier for you.
And, it got worse as you got toward the university, I think. So.
Oh, yes.
And Martin Luther King is always an awful nightmare.
Yes.
They, for some reason, forget to plow that.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
I live right next to Christ and they haven't plowed our street yet. So my husband parked at the bottom of the hill last night so he could get to work on time.
Oh. Who are we missing? We're missing Christelle.
Yeah, I was going to say.
No,
Can anybody-
Christelle's here. We're missing Chanel and Kyle.
Yes.
I sent an email to both of them.
What about Danny?
Danny may or may not be able to jump on.
Ah.
So he was the only one we heard from.
Okay.
So it's just the two outliers there. If you can just give them another minute, I'd appreciate that.
No problem. While we're waiting, let's go ahead and just start reflecting on how would you like to be remembered as a mentor?
Shall we go ahead and get started, or are we going to wait a few more minutes?
I think we need to start, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, but
I guess I would go ahead. And we'll see if we can get the other two scragglers coming in.
Especially for introductions. Is that okay, everyone, all the presenters?
It's good for me.
Okay. Take it away, Cope.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to our workshop, and I think we've already updated our preferred names and pronouns. And the reflection that we're asking you to think about as we go through this is, how would you like to be remembered as a mentor? Next slide, Stephanie. These are our learning objectives for this workshop. We want to talk about effectively communicating a project, co-creating a compact with a mentee so that you both have the same level of expectations. We want to reflect on our aspects of identity and how our identity influences how we engage in mentorship. And we also want to generate ideas for strengthening the culture of inclusion in research mentorship. Next slide, Stephanie. So effective communication is part of all of this. Megan, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, next slide. So you guys remember in the spring, I covered this topic, so I'm just going to give a brief review. But the big takeaway is that communication is one of the easiest areas to have break down, and we all communicate differently, and we have different strengths and weaknesses in our communication styles. So we want to make sure that we're communicating the expectations to our mentees as well as, other people in our groups. And when you can communicate clearly and align expectations, the outcomes can often be have less conflict and a lot less mistrust. So next slide, please. So you guys remember from the spring that we covered these colors. There's a bunch of different assessments out there that one we may even do in the future called Strength Finders. But what they essentially break down is that there are different styles of communication that have different areas of emphasis. So we have, let's greet this person. I didn't see who it was. Hey, Kyle. So we have different areas of communication that emphasize different things. We have task-oriented people that are blue or considered blue and green communicators. And then you have people or relationship-oriented persons who are yellow and red. No color is better than any other. It's not a surprise that certain professions draw certain colors, but it's really important to build a healthy, effective team. You need to have a balance of these colors and persons on your team. And in that way, if you are asked to be on a team or perform in a color group that's not really your style, it can often be a draining oriented person in lab space. And those are the days that are really draining to me. Versus like talking on this kind of stuff, I really like doing it. So I think it's great. Oh, let me turn off my video and see if that helps. All right, next slide, please. So again, these were our colors from the spring. As you can see, everyone tested mainly in the green. I think I was the one red person, and then there were a couple people that were red, green, and yellow. So let's walk through just memory lane for just a second, and we'll see a little bit of how to effectively communicate with those persons. Next slide. So blue people are task-oriented. They have checklists. They want to get things done. They're very direct and to the point. Oftentimes their emails come across as brisk or terse. To persons that are on the yellow or the orange or the red spectrum, this can be really rude almost, because they're not asking about you as a person, and they seem to value more of the task orientation things. So next slide, please. Same thing with green people. They're very task oriented. They have checklists, but their checklists are slightly different than persons that are blue oriented, and that are the checklists in sequential sequential order? Do they have a protocol? Is this going to follow the details that they require to get the task completed? Next slide, please. Red people are very people-oriented. So we have this slide highlighted that says, ask them for your help and cooperation, but preferably not at the last minute. Because they're people-oriented, they plan their days, their schedule is worked out. They know what the people around them are doing. So to come at them the last second with an emergency can sometimes seem inconsiderate to them. Like I said, they're very people oriented, so they're going to know whose birthday is going on in your workspace as well. Next slide, please. So then for yellow people, they're oftentimes the big idea people. They're difficult to catch for details. Green and blue people often find it difficult to have conversations with yellow people in a professional setting because they're thinking blue and green people want more details. They want to see the nitty-gritty things. So their emails, yellow people's emails are oftentimes rambling and really long-winded, maybe not with a point. They often talk in metaphors, they use pictures, things like that. So next slide. So to kind of get a little bit of a feeling for this, we're going to walk through some vignettes. So I'm going to hand this over to Laura and Cope, and they're going to walk through, and then we'll decide what color we think these people are, or what style of communication they use. Go ahead,
Are you ready,
guys.
Laura?
Yeah.
Okay. What's wrong?
Oh, it's Zelda. She went home and didn't put all the patient information into RedCat before she left.
She'll do it in the morning. She always does.
Data is supposed to be entered as soon as possible so we don't make mistakes. She does this all the time.
Well, you know she has to leave by 4:30 every day. Maybe she'll do it tomorrow, or maybe she'll do it at home. If you're really worried about it, maybe you could do it.
She needs to organize herself better. The data are supposed to be entered immediately. We can't afford mistakes.
It's not that big a deal. Are you okay?
I just think she needs to do her job. You're always taking her side.
Oh, you're fine. Go ahead, advance the slide. So this is just a simple vignette to break down some of the differences in colors. I know that a lot of us are green in our group. Does this sound like something you guys would have happen in your lab space? Or how would you communicate differently if you wanted the expectation that the data be entered before the end of the day? Like, how would you mediate this? Does anyone have any input?
I think it's always good when starting a project or working with people for the first time to go over expectations.
I agree completely. If she didn't know she needed to enter the data, I think, it could just be a slip of the mind. It wasn't a personal attack against them. They weren't trying to undermine your data. So anywho, bearing in mind when you have these conversations come up with your coworkers, check yourself, think of their communication style, and assume positive intent for most persons. I don't think too many of us are nefarious. But next slide, please.
All right,
Jason, all you.
All right, thank you much, Megan. So just a friendly reminder, my name is Jason Blackard. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Internal Medicine. I also have a furry work colleague that's joining me today. So hopefully he will stay calm and collected and not walk across my keyboard right now. So we had a great segue about aligning expectations. So that's going to be the next few slides that I'm going to go through with a couple of case examples and a couple of active learning exercises. So one of the things that comes up with aligning expectations frequently is just how do you get started with this and expressing your expectations and hearing them from others as well. Next slide. So I'm going to start us with an example. Now I'm going to say I made this one up, but it's actually, I think, very relevant to many of us on the call, regardless of our level of engagement in the research process. So your principal investigator, let me have somebody else read this rather than me reading this. It's short, so if I could have a volunteer just read it out loud for us, that would be great.
Jason, I'll read it.
Thank you.
Your PI has just received a new 5-year grant from the NIH to fund their research. The approved budget includes hiring a new postdoctoral research fellow, 2 PhD students, and 3 undergraduate students. Your PI has asked you for your input on the onboarding process for these new people. What should be communicated to the new team members about the research project, the laboratory environment, and expectations?
Great, thank you, Laura. So as you can understand, you could be the PI in this case, or you could be somebody working with the PI. But at the end of the day, we want to talk about a brand new person coming in, and it could be at various levels because we're hiring several people, but what do we want to communicate with them? So Stephanie, can I have you go to the next slide, please? So what we're going to do for the next couple of minutes is just have you, off the top of your head, come up with some of the things that you want to communicate or that you would want to talk to those individuals about. So remember that we're talking about onboarding several new team members, and we want to talk to them about a research project, the laboratory environment, expectations, etc. So keep that in mind as Stephanie goes to the next slide. And there's an annotate function in Zoom that hopefully most of you have used, but if you go to the top right of your screen within Zoom, there's a view options and there's an annotate button. So keep that question in mind and just start jotting down some ideas that you have. There's actually a pen function, but there's actually a typing text function as well, where you can type in short responses. And as you can see, we'll be able to see them. And hopefully, Stephanie, if you don't mind moving them around, I think you'll be able to do that a little bit easier than I will.
Is anybody having troubles seeing the annotate? Once you click on annotate, seeing mouse, select text, unmute yourself and I'll help you out. It's no problem at all.
Just click on view options and you'll see annotate, and then you can click on the text function, which will make it a little easier to write.
There we
go. Nice, Crystal.
So there's probably quite a bit of things that we want to communicate about the project, about the research environment, about the expectations. So don't limit yourself, or don't feel that you have to only say one thing. You can certainly add multiple items that you'd like to communicate.
Whoops, sorry about that. Looking good. Yeah, and you can put check marks on ones you agree. Great job, Coop. Thanks for doing that.
Be great to have everybody include at least one item, but feel free to include more than one as well.
Whoever said reserving this cell culture room.
It's hard to hear you, Megan. You're breaking up.
I'll use the chat.
Okay, great. I'm trying to move these around a bit. So
You're doing a great job, Stephanie.
Okay,
Thank you for
good.
doing that.
Yeah,
it's a
no
little
problem.
harder to do it at my end.
No worries. And if, yep, great, Susan. Yep, everyone's figuring out the check marks. Great job, everyone.
Great. So I think we can take a moment and look through these. Feel free to add more. There's no reason to stop typing if you've got additional things that aren't there. But again, these are new individuals, and we have to assume that they know very little about our research environment. They probably know a little bit about the research project because that's what we're hiring them for, but they're not going to be able to read our minds. So we're going to have to communicate some expectations, either that we have as a research group, or perhaps that your PI has, or perhaps even that the university or your department has. I'll go through these pretty quickly. but I think talking about the lab environment in general is great. And is that what does that consist of? What kind of skills do we need? What do we need to develop? How do they fit into the current environment? Milestones are always great, particularly if you've got people that are very task oriented. I love this expectation or this communicating to people about email, text, and phone call. What are all those numbers that they need to know, and which might you prefer? As a PI, I'm very comfortable now communicating with my lab members via text. But I did find out recently that my technician, who's 68 years old, has no idea how to text on his phone. And so I have to think about that. That's a reasonable thing for us to discuss. How might you communicate if you have challenges getting certain tasks done for a variety of reasons, completing things and how they may affect others, the length of the project. I love this comment about observations of the PI's communication preferences or styles. We as people that are helping to onboard new lab members may have some insights that we want to share with people about how to get the quickest response or the most effective response. Necessary trainings, group lab meetings, etc. So you see there's a wealth of things that we want to communicate. So as I go to the next slide, though, I'm going to ask you just a couple of things to think about. And during our discussions about aligning expectations and getting people started, one of the things that we came up, there are two questions that I have you consider, and maybe a couple of people can chime in. Could you imagine that the expectations may differ for the lab itself compared to the PI? And then the second question is, could you imagine that the expectations might change depending upon the project that we're talking about? So anybody care to chime in and say yay or nay or what they think? Again, could the expectations of the PI differ from that of the lab? And could the expectations change depending on the project that we're talking about? We're a quiet group today, but I'm going to let somebody respond.
I definitely think expectations change for different projects because, and I think this is true for many researchers, a lot of projects are so collaborative that for each project, you're not always working with the same team. You may have the same core team, but you may have vastly different collaborators with their own different styles.
Great, thank you, Leah. And I think there's a comment from the chat that I'll bring in response to the other question is, as PIs, we're frequently not in the lab. You know that our jobs are slightly different. Maybe we've seasoned out of the lab, for lack of a better way of saying it. So maybe the expectations that we as PIs have might differ from that of the lab. And I think that's a challenging scenario. But again, we have to consider when we're talking about aligning expectations is whose expectations are we actually talking about? So with that said, I wanted to use this opportunity or this exercise to get us started. And I'll have Stephanie go to the next slide, if you don't mind. Thank you. Oh, and I forgot that we're going to carry over the annotations until we blank them out. So the next part of our aligning expectations discussion that I wanted to focus on was project descriptions. Now, this is going to sound a little bit tedious at times, but it's been my experience in my years at UC that depending particularly for younger individuals, that it's hard to get the knowledge out of the PI's brain into the brain of the student. And so some of aligning expectations is simply providing some clear instructions on what we're going to do next. So next slide, please. So let's remember that communicating with a learner about their research project, of course, is not always easy. People learn in different ways, and we as mentors communicate in different ways as well. So there's the communication style of our mentee, there's the communication style of our mentor, and there's the communication style of others in the group that may be impacted. So we should always be carefully considering how we communicate these research projects to potential mentees. And I'm going to go through just a couple of quick slides with some of the things that we want to consider. Now, again, for those of us that aren't perhaps ready to be hiring somebody, think of this in anticipation of running your own lab or being the person in charge once you graduate or finish your fellowship, et cetera. So, of course, some of the basic things that we want to think about, and we've already talked about in the getting started exercise, were what are the background of the people that we're pulling into our team? What's their relevant work or education experience? What kind of skills do they already have? What might be recommended skills? What might be required? In other words, essential ones. I would imagine that most of us have expectations around somebody's skills related to writing, presentation, and organization. And of course, depending on the individual that we're talking about, we want to chat with them about their time commitment and their availability, particularly for younger students that may have a considerable amount of coursework going on as well. Another thing that we have to consider is I think most of us that work in a lab realize that sometimes we are hiring people, meaning that we are paying them a full-time salary, and sometimes they're joining our lab through another process. So what is that onboarding process and how are they even getting to you in the first place? Are they applying directly to you as a PI for a research experience, which would be very similar to the normal hiring process? Or are they participating in a structured research experience? And that may be more similar to, say, either what our graduate students or particularly our undergraduates are doing, say, during a SURF program during the summer. If they're participating in a program, particularly when we're onboarding them or bringing them into the lab space, we probably need to have some understanding of what the deadlines are for that program, what types of materials need to be submitted for that application, because it's usually not just a CV, there's usually more information. A review of those materials if you're so inclined. And then for the postdocs and higher, this is usually going to look like a job application, right? So therefore, there's going to be significant amount of input from human resources, either to write the job description or to get all the paperwork done to onboard that particular individual. So next slide, please. So as a mentor, and that can be a mentor at any level for a mentee at any level, you may ask a student to write up their own research project, or perhaps you write that research project for them. Now, those are pretty extreme ends of the spectrum, but regardless of your approach, the details of the project need to be clear to both the mentor and the mentee. So in this case, I use a suggestion that we have is a written project description that's helpful specifically in aligning expectations and assessing understanding around the research project. So for instance, in this particular slide, you'll see that the research, I'm going to give you an example in the next slide, but that research description has a very basic, what's the research goal? What are some of the specific aims, hypotheses? Particularly for a younger individual, the research strategy and the techniques may not be as relevant as the general area that you're working in. But then I like to include some sort of expectations around disseminating their findings, whether I'm going to ask them to generate a poster, whether I'd like them to present at the graduate student forum or perhaps at the undergraduate research symposium. Some discussion about how often they need to be working on that project. So a postdoc, we say a 40-hour work week, bare minimum, right? A graduate student, we'd say the same. But what happens when an undergraduate trainee comes to you for the summer might be 40 hours. But if they come to you during the standard school year, 40 hours isn't going to work, right? They've got many other expectations, many other things that they're doing with their time. And then, of course, we all, some of us find this conversation about money or remuneration to be a little bit awkward, but we really do need to hit that up front and say, are we talking about somebody being paid a full-time salary? Are we talking about somebody getting an hourly pay? Are they getting course credit, research for credit, or are they volunteering? Next slide, please. So here is an example of what I do. Now, I'm going to say up front, this is actually an example that I use for summer students, specifically medical students that are rotating within my research lab. I think the other PIs on the lab have medical students, graduate students, undergrads. That's pretty typical. We have trainees at a variety of levels. And I actually think this particular system, while it was specifically written up for medical students, would work really well for undergraduates and probably for graduate students as well. The information, as you can see here, kind of includes a basic statement about a project type. There are times, particularly for students applying for a variety of labs, where they really need to give careful consideration to what's the type of project, not just the specific details. And then, as you can see, I've provided a short description of the project. This isn't meant to be, in my case, exhaustive. And the reason being is I know that most of my junior trainees won't have a lot of virology experience. They probably have not taken a virology class. So asking them to write a 5-page application about a virology project with minimal input from me maybe above their skill set. So I write this as a very short description. And then over the course of time, I let the student or the trainee expand upon that. In other words, I give them a half paragraph. And by the end of the summer, I say, you should be able to take my half paragraph and write 2 or 3 pages bare minimum, so that I'm starting to get a better feel for how much they understand, and they are getting some experience writing rather than me doing it for them. Next slide, please. Also in this example, now granted, this is actually done online, but it really does actually look very similar to this. As I talk to the students about the expectations that I have of them, in this case for the summer. So as you can see here, I've got a list of several options. And as the PI, I'm deciding what my expectations are of that student by simply highlighting some of these options. For this particular project, I also give them learning goals. And in this case, I tend to give 3 to 5, like most people probably do. But my first learning objective is actually more about gaining knowledge. It has nothing to do specifically with the project per se, as much as I want them to learn more about viruses in general and why they're clinically relevant, something pretty broad. Aims 2, 3, and 4 are more technique driven and analysis based. And then of course, you'll see number 5, I think I had mentioned previously, where I have the expectation, like many people would, that at the end of your summer experience, that you will present a poster at a local poster competition, whether that's the surf competition, symposium, whether that's the undergraduate research symposium, the graduate school expo, etc. For my medical students, there's an option in November, the research and service symposium that they can present at as well. Again, this is short. This is something that I've written for the student, but they then expand on over the course of the summer. Next slide. So after we've talked about some of the getting started and some of the things that we need to be thinking about, as well as project descriptions, there are other ways that we can align mentor-mentee expectations, and this is through the use of compacts. You will hear these referred to as agreements, as contracts, as compacts. I think I prefer the word compact because they're not legally binding. This isn't something that we need a lawyer involved in like a contract would be. So I'd like to give you a few examples. Next slide, please. You do not need to read this, and we are not going to read it for you either. But at its core, compacts or agreements include a list of shared values and expectations. Now, I'm going to give you 3 examples here. The first one is specifically for postdocs, but there are examples that I will share with you via email that are for postdocs, kind of specific. There are some that are undergraduate research focused, and of course, we also have them for junior faculty as well. The idea here would be, in the ideal sense, that they are co-created between the mentor and the mentee, but you do not need to start from scratch because templates for these exist and are widely used in a number of different scenarios. So while I'm showing you some examples, don't think that these can't be adapted for your own purpose. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jason, there was a
Oh.
question in the chat and it's from Carolyn. And
Yeah,
it says, when do you give student the outline of your expectations when you're interviewing them for a match, or before they join the lab, or as they join the lab?
Great question. And I will say that you have all options. There's no right or wrong way. I think this is one of the things that people find very challenging in discussions about mentorship, is that they're worried that they're going to do something wrong. And I would say, don't worry about that, because there's no right or wrong there's no right or wrong way of doing this. Some people definitely communicate all of their expectations up front the very first time they meet somebody. Some of us, myself included, probably wait until the second or the third meeting to do that. My rationale may be different from others, and that's perfectly fine. And I appreciate that other people could do this differently. I tend to think that particularly with the younger individuals, that we can overwhelm them very quickly as experts in our own field. And so I like to get to know somebody during that first meeting and talk to them in more generalities. And I also say that by walking in my door, you are not committing to working in my lab, and I am not committed to working with you. And what that means is they have to come back a second time. That's my way of assessing their interest, and very intentionally saying to them, particularly again for the younger individuals, that I want you to talk to other PIs about possibilities that they may have, because Carolyn or Susan or others may be better fits for those students based on their research interest or based on things outside of research that we need to consider. And so I want to kind of enforce that by saying, I'm going to tell you about our lab makeup, some of the basic expectations, but let's come back and have a second conversation if you end up being interested.
Yeah,
Great question, though. Thank you.
I asked because I really liked your slides on it. I'm thinking about for the prep students that we're about to start matching, right? And we already had decided we wanted a written description of the research, but I'll be coming to you for your slides if you don't.
Please do. Yeah. And I will say that, I've had this experience, I think I alluded to it, where I know people that say to medical students, well, my way of figuring out if you're interested in working in my lab is whether you can write a research proposal that has 3 specific aims and tells me everything you're going to do. Right. My personal experience is that's a big expectation. That's a big hurdle for a medical student to reach. So I don't want to do the work for them, but I want to enable them to move from one step to another. Next slide, please. So that was our postdoc example again, and here's kind of the content of that. Again, we do not need to read this, but you can notice on the left side, there's a series of statements that this particular template has that include expectations or commitments for the postdoc. I acknowledge that I have primary responsibility for my own career. I will show respect for and with the people I work with. I will take a lifelong learning approach. I will schedule meetings and provide agendas, these sorts of things. The reason I wanted to highlight this a little bit more is on the flip side, what it says for mentors. The use of a compact should be considered a relationship building tool, which means there needs to be 2 people involved. So it's not enough for us as PIs to write what we expect of the postdoc fellows, but maybe the postdocs need to write what they expect of us as PIs. So in this case, for a postdoc, the first statement that you can see, I acknowledge that the postdoc is a time of advanced training, and that I as the mentor need to be helpful in promoting the career development of that individual. I will ensure that we have mutually agreed upon expectations, perhaps through the use of this compact or through earlier discussions that you may have. I will strive to maintain a relationship built on trust and respect, and then several other topics as well. Carolyn, you made a good comment on the chat that I'm going to get to in my next slide, because I think you know exactly what's happening. Is at the College of Medicine specifically, the Office of Graduate Education has just implemented what I really like as a agreement between the graduate students and their faculty advisor. Now, again, we don't need to read this. There are examples. If you are a graduate student on this call, I can almost guarantee that you've already seen this, because if you haven't, we've inadvertently missed you. And the PIs have all seen them as well. But the nice thing is, again, is that there's two sides to this. It's very clearly meant to be a relationship building tool and an expectations building tool, where the graduate students have expectations that they go through, read, and initial. But then on the flip side, the faculty advisor or the mentor has a section that they read through. The other thing that I really like about this, and that I would like to implement in my own spaces, is that there are plenty of places you can see the extra lines where you can type in your own text. In other words, they're not meant to be a one size fits all sort of scenario, because every mentee is unique and every mentor is unique. So there may be some adaptation that's needed. And then what we're not seeing in this particular example, but at the end, there's a place where people sign. Again, this isn't a contract per se, but it's meant to elevate the seriousness of the discussion. And I think for the graduate school one here at UC specifically, the program directors also sign it. So,
Jason,
yeah.
Can I interrupt?
Please do, yeah.
We have 2 graduate students that have actually gone through it in our program that are on board. And I was wondering if they might comment on what their thoughts were, because, I don't necessarily think they were involved in that process, but, we've sent it to them and we encourage the conversation, and I'd like to get some feedback if that's
No,
okay.
great. Thank you for suggesting that. I would love to too as well. So if you are one of the people that have filled these out and you don't mind, recently, and you don't mind sharing a little bit, please chime in and let us know what you thought about. Was it a useful? Were there things that were missing?
I'm a current graduate student. When I filled mine out, I saw that it mirrored a lot of the same conversations we had when I filled out my IDP. So I wasn't really surprised by anything that I saw there. It was very helpful in reminding me kind of what the expectations were. Like, as a grad student, we have a lot of responsibilities that are put on us, and sometimes it's easy to forget, the importance of having an agenda when you have to go to meet with your PI. A lot of times, we just have these impromptu meetings, and having things that are a lot more laid out and a lot more formalized really help to make sure that benchmarks are being met and stuff like that. So I actually really like this document.
Great, thank you.
Chanel, I'll jump in as well in agreement. And I find that revisiting these more than once a year, or even having a small compact for each, not even a compact, but like an agenda as you're working through projects, has been really helpful to keep on track with things and keep everybody accountable in each, mentor.
Right.
Great, thank you. So I think right now, all of the graduate students, regardless of whether they're at UC or over at Children's, are in the process of working through these. But I like the comment as well about it reminded you of your IDP, of that individual development plan. There are some distinctions and differences between the two, but they complement each other really well, don't they? Because this can remind you of some of the basics that we might forget about or just need friendly reminders about, versus the IDP, kind of by the name, individual, is very attuned to us and perhaps a specific project or set of projects that we're working on, with milestones, career development goals, etc. So thank you. Stephanie, I'll have you go to the next slide. And what I'd like to do now is actually work us through a case study. This is actually a case study that was developed by the University of Wisconsin, and I use this and several others all the time in our mentor training exercises. So what I'd like to do is have one of the participants today read the case for everybody out loud. And then there's a small number of questions that we'll use to facilitate the discussion for the next 10 minutes or so. So could I have a volunteer to read the case out loud for everybody?
I'll volunteer.
Thank you.
Dr. Bento is beginning the second year as a clinical and translational research at the Academic Health Center. To date, Dr. Bento has enjoyed working on the Mentors research project, but is becoming anxious about not yet starting an independent research project. Dr. Bento wants to bring up these concerns, but it seems the mentor never has enough time to have a discussion focused on Dr. Bento's research goals. This situation is becoming frustrating as Dr. Bento likes the mentor and understands that the past few months have been extremely busy for the mentor due to a host of factors. For example, budget constraints, preparing applications for the NIH funds, a busy home life, etc. Dr. Bento is reluctant to make a misstep with the well-established senior mentor, yet knows that the clock is ticking. Dr. Bento is also concerned that these strong interests in translational research are too divergent from the mentor's basic research program and wants to stop feeling stuck.
Great, thank you, and my apologies for the typos. At least I know they're there and I can correct them now. So Stephanie, can I have you go to the next slide for us? So the mentors on this call will know these examples sound very similar because we use them again and again in a variety of settings. But what you'll see is that these are actually structured to be very open-ended. And so what we're going to do is just go through a small number of questions here, and I'd like to have everybody chime in and to facilitate this. But what were some of the, separate from what we need to do or how we can prevent this from happening? We'll get there in a second. But what are some of the main themes that you heard in this case study? There's no right or wrong answers here. So
maybe like lack of well-defined goals.
Okay, thank you.
A lack of comfortable communication with each other. They should be emailing or talking in person.
Thank you.
They have a lot of anxiety that they're not discussing with their mentor, which they should be.
I read anxiety in this case study as well. Yep. Other themes that arise or that this makes you think of? So let me ask you this. We'll move to this next question. The way these case studies typically are structured is we take a little bit of a preventative approach. What could we have done to prevent the situation? And then we take a therapeutic approach. Now that we're in the situation, what do we do about it? So what could we have done to avoid this situation first?
I think outlining the clear goals and expectations. They should have had 1 or 2 meetings at the beginning to really discuss those things like the compacts we were just talking about.
Okay, thank you, Megan. So that could be, I think exactly like Megan said, it could be in person, and that could be verbalizing it, but it could also be written. And if you're not sure, I might suggest both, because not all of us retain everything that we hear, and not all of us read what's handed to us in a piece of paper. Other things that we could have done to avoid this situation.
The minute they started to feel anxious about their situation, they should have sat down and had a talk with their PI just to clarify directions and goals. Like the initial problem of thinking that their research might be a little bit too divergent from their mentor's basic research wouldn't be a problem if you were sure that your mentor supported the direction you wanted to go in.
Very good, thank you. So now that we're in this situation, unfortunately, we can't prevent these things from happening all the time. And sometimes we land ourselves in the, now what do I do? So let's think about this from both people's perspective. There are things that the mentor could do now that we're in this situation, and there are things that the mentee could do. Feel free to answer for either one of those, but now that we're in this situation, what should the mentor or the mentee do about it?
I think they need to determine whether the mentee's goals are feasible within the context of the lab, and if they are too divergent and the mentor is willing and capable, either enable that or maybe help the mentee find someone who can collaborate or help him achieve its goals. Because if that's not possible, I feel like this maybe wasn't a good fit in the first place.
Right. Great. So that's a great discussion about, you know, fitting into the lab and finding collaborators as a way to kind of expand the reach of the lab if that's something that the PI is willing to do. Thank you. Other things that the mentor or the mentee could do now that we're in this challenging scenario. Would anybody be willing to go back now that you're in the scenario and try to work with a compact to see if that would help?
I would make a comment, and that is that the mentor may be fairly oblivious that there's a problem, right?
Thank you, Carolyn. Your choice of words, and I'm going to completely agree, is, you know, we started, I think in our earlier slides, we said perhaps we need to assume positive intent. And I am one of those oblivious people.
Yeah,
if you don't slap me in the face with the problem, I probably won't realize that there is one. So perhaps in saying that, we want the suggestion is let's assume positive intent and verbalize and vocalize what our concerns are, whether we're the mentee or the mentor. Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate that.
And my advice to the mentee would be, because this is really difficult, I would advise them to write it down and send an email so that the mentor is able to deal with it on their own time, and that you have, as a mentee, have had the chance to really carefully say what you want to say so that you don't end up angry or whatever and souring the relationship. That give your mentor the heads up, and then you can have a discussion. That would be my advice.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm going to hold off on the next slide for just or the next question for just a second, because one thing that you should notice about this slide is that, or the case scenario is that you have no idea what the gender of the individuals is, or the race, or the nationality. In fact, we don't have a lot of information about what level they're at in general. So let me ask you if your responses to any of these questions would change if we knew the gender of the mentor or the mentee, or perhaps if the gender expression and identity of the mentor and the mentee were mismatched, not the same.
I think it would play a big difference, or it could play a difference.
Do you have can you think of an example, Megan, or a scenario that you've heard of at least?
Yeah, I mean, like I previously had male mentors and PIs in the lab space, and you know, it was just a different, yeah, I see, like here's Cope talking about how women tend to be more sympathetic. Like, I don't know, I didn't ever want to bother my old PI, and I don't know, I always felt like he was busy versus the female PIs, they have an open door policy. So like it was more receptive to that kind of stuff.
Right. Has anybody else had an experience like that where maybe there were some noticeable difference, maybe not just in gender, but it could also be in race? What if there was a racial difference between these individuals? How might some of these discussions about aligning expectations kind of miss the mark?
I feel like I don't know if it's races so much as cultures, but I feel like for certain cultures, there's more of an expectation that the project and scope of the lab is defined solely by the PI, and you do what the PI says. There's not much deviation. Whereas others, I feel like the mentee might have a lot more, I guess, academic freedom to pursue what they want to pursue.
So I'm chuckling in the background because I love what you're saying, and it reminds me of, and probably many of the PIs, yeah, what happens when we're coming from different cultural backgrounds and the mentee and the mentor interact fundamentally different from a cultural standpoint. And that's a real challenge. And it goes back to our conversations that Megan Johnstone led us on about communication and communication styles, and really thinking very thoughtfully about what our communication style is and what somebody else's communication style is, but also appreciating that those differences may take a little while to come to a happy median in developing what are our expectations and our communication styles and how do we talk about that stuff. So I'll leave us with one final just thought here, which is this last question. But now we're all mentors. So everybody can chime in, but how would you determine your mentees' expectations of you and of the research experience? So maybe that's the senior PIs, the Susans, the Carolines, myself on the call, but maybe it's you're a graduate student or a postdoc mentoring a summer student. How do you determine what their expectations are of you?
I've had an undergraduate mentee before, and I mean, I just asked her, were there any techniques that she was particularly interested in learning, or any machine in the lab that she wanted experience with? I just pretty much left the door open for her to tell me anything she wanted to know. And if she was particularly shy, I just made it a point to show her as much of the individual things that I knew, until she started offering up suggestions of her own. And then we'd focus on those suggestions.
Great, great. Thank you, Chanel. I really appreciate that. What do other people have to say too? This isn't the easiest thing necessarily. I mean, we do have to know what their expectations are of us too, right? It's not really kind of a fair scenario for us to just say, this is what I want from you and never ask for the reverse. Other people have thoughts about determining mentees' expectations of you in the research experience?
I think like what was said earlier, just asking them and maybe asking the mentee what their career goals are, because I've noticed a stark difference in mentees I've had that want to go the, I guess, PhD track versus ones that sometimes, quite frankly, just need something on their CV to get into med school.
Yep. Yep.
I would agree with you, Leah.
It's good to ask
As
them.
well.
It's good to ask them and force them to say out loud what they want to do, what their career aspirations are. And it's good practice for them as well, right? They're going to be asked that question quite a bit, so they might as well be able to articulate it to you on a regular basis as well. So that's the end of our case study. And if I remember correctly, I think our next slide is actually a bio break. And then we'll come back and we'll have a different topic. So thank you.
So in 5 minutes, what time are we at? So let's see here. I have 5 after. Does everybody have 5 after? I'm seeing my watch instead of. Okay. So about 10 after, does everyone feel good about that?
Sounds good.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Yeah, 10 after. And please put your videos on so at 10 after or when you get back, so we know when to begin. Thanks so much, everybody. Totally agree. He might have needed his bio break, but yes, it was a great lead into your, especially the last part, Megan. Great lead in.
Yeah, that was some nice freestyling there.
I know.
Okay, so I want to make sure.
And
Sorry, I did hear you. Thank you. I was just in the background sending a message to my mother-in-law.
there you go. Okay, Megan. I still see your presentation mode, so
Thanks.
there you go.
All right.
And why is your closed captioning so much better than mine.
Oh yeah, can you turn off that closed captioning? That was hilarious to me. Did you see the things that were like,
Yeah, it was like
fine.
your bed and something about anger.
I love the closed captioning. I think it's very entertaining. Leave that
Yeah, we're
in.
gonna use that for your class too, but
I think
what
that's
happened?
great.
I mean, I did turn it off, but I used it in the PowerPoint just like you did. So what did
I thought
yeah,
you were using Zooms. I'm using PowerPoint closed captioning.
so did we?
Oh.
Yeah, so like I'm talking and it's going so well.
Uh-huh.
And Jason was slow. Megan slowed herself down. So I don't know why. Anyway, we'll get this together sooner or later.
Yeah, there was a blurb about chocolates.
Yeah.
Weather.
All that.
See how it says? And even like it says chocolates, but it chocolates. See?
Now, there were a couple of funny oddities, weren't there? I'm like, oh God, I wonder what would happen if I started cursing, which I'm not, but.
Come on, say it real quick.
No, I'm not going to.
I want to see what the spell check does. Come on, Jason.
Well, autocorrect is the devil as far as I'm concerned. So.
The
devil.
Yes.
And this is the same idea.
Yep. Well,
so, yeah.
You can fix it. Just take a piece of tape and put it over the screen where it's doing that, and you won't have that problem.
Well, that's why I turned it off because Laura's like, it's not working. I'm like, I know. And
I was asking if you wanted
for
to
it to be better and better. So Megan, you just did on the right hand, well, wherever it is on your toolbar in PowerPoint, you just turned it on. Like we figured it out when you had to leave on the last meeting.
Okay.
And so is that all you did?
I mean, honestly, I don't know that mine turns off anymore. I feel like
why is yours so much better? Maybe it's because you've practiced. So
it's some kind of update. Maybe it's AI knows me.
Yeah, yeah, maybe I need to use it more, and so it will get better. I'm gonna research it a little bit more in PowerPoint.
Maybe it's only gonna pick up it has to be turned on by the speaker. In other words, like I don't think maybe Jason had it turned on.
I didn't turn it on at my end, but I love the fact, I love that just knowing that it's there because I just always worry that I get talking too quickly or something.
And everybody. It's just you, Megan.
Now I see two transcripts.
No, I know. I was playing. Because there is live transcript to it in Zoom that we could use, but.
I just gave a lecture for a medical school in Cambodia on Sunday night, and I had 60 students that I should have been thinking about turning this on because I was the only speaker.
Yeah.
So if I got going too fast or my Southern accent came out, I'm like, it would have helped them, I think.
Or you said
does
shit.
It translate it into
Let me see if it
Cambodian?
happened. It did it. Nope.
Did it say shit?
Nope. No, come on. Oh, it did it. Okay, that's PowerPoint. Now I want to see if the live transcript was good. Just kidding.
Chanel's trying really hard not to. She's muted herself too, so that she's not laughing out loud. I love it. Yeah.
See, now we're seeing everybody come back with laughter.
I love this.
We didn't even need to do a poll with your favorite superhero. We just needed to play with the CC. I love it. Join us if you'd like to help us play with it, of course.
Everything's a toy.
But Leah, I'm so jealous. I keep seeing the palm tree, I mean, it's a lovely background. I use it all the time, but when I get to watch it on someone else's, it's like, oh, as I'm looking outside to all the snow.
It's definitely different than what I see downtown right now.
Yeah. So thank you for answering and putting your input in as much as possible, because then I get to see your background. So
Leah, is that your own video?
No, there's a couple live video options on Zoom and they just keep looping and looping. There's a beach, there's Northern Lights.
Yes.
I can't remember.
I didn't realize there were videos. Oh, I got to try that.
They're pretty neat.
Since I'm just sitting here.
I downloaded one earlier this year and it was in Jurassic Park, and you know how you like go through the archways?
Yeah.
And then like it was fun.
Yeah.
The BioRender website has some cool backgrounds. They're stills, but they're biology themed.
There was a guy early on that recorded his background, and that was his video playing, but he had a video of him bringing himself coffee. So in the middle of his Zoom meeting, he shows up and brings himself coffee. And so that made the viral rounds early on and all this mess.
That's fantastic.
That's a really good one.
What I should do is just record a video of me going like, yes, so I could walk away.
There's probably an app for that now.
Yeah, no kidding.
I've seen a video where someone did that. I think it may have been Wired or Vice, and he actually got away with it for a whole month's long worth of meetings, a pre-recording, until he told his boss.
You just never turn it off.
That is priceless. Has anyone had any embarrassing moments on Zoom? You know, like you see on the TV.
Oh, yes, there are embarrassing moments on
And
Zoom.
he had to tell his boss. That was the thing.
Yeah, but because it was for Wired, this tech, publishing source, it was part of something he was writing up about Zoom. So they all had a good giggle, and because it's kind of part of his job to test those kinds of things out.
That is funny. That is funny. I'm gonna have to remember that one. When we talk about technology and teams, just in case you want to test out your people on Teams, see if people will miss you or know that you talk about anything, or if they miss you in discussions by let's see. Let me go through looks like we're coming back. We need Carolyn and Kaylin. Getting close. Oh, Jack, your background's too cold for me today, but it's beautiful.
I'm back.
I took that a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, I figured you took a picture of it. Oh, it's beautiful, but I'm so cold. I want to go back to Leah.
I'm back. I'm packing my suitcase, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to hop off this fairly soon.
No problem.
Have a safe flight.
Great. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And have a safe flight, and actually
safe travels back.
Yes.
Yep. Maybe you can find an ice scraper in the airport.
Bring back a couple shovels for us. All shovels are gone. Eggs, milk. What else, everybody? Water.
Salt and toilet paper.
Oh yeah, it was the 4 S's. Salt, not
Toilet
sugar.
paper is not an S.
What is it?
Oh, wait a minute. Never
Yeah,
mind.
it is. Jack, be careful.
I know. Getting never mind.
Thank God we're on the pod. We're paused our recording. Thank goodness. Anywho. Yeah, salt. But we'll let it go. Thanks, Carolyn. Be safe.
Hey, I have a request before we start the next section. I want to
Yes.
see how you feel about it. What if we stopped recording?
Were you planning on saying something, Megan?
If there is
We
value
can
to
always cut it
recording,
out, Megan.
we can do it. We can stop recording.
We can stop recording, but I can continue to record and cut things out if you'd like.
Yeah, we actually don't post this anywhere. It's
We
really
can't
just
say
for
that we're
our-
accidentally stopping recording because it's printed out right there on the screen.
All right. So we will use the recordings just for our own training purposes.
Yes.
And will not share them with anyone.
Or we can cut them out. It's up to our team. We haven't really decided as a team science team, but
But we don't have to actually publish the recording,
That's
so
right.
we can edit them.
Will not.
that's
Okay.
right.
Okay.
No,
Or
this is a safe space.
It is a safe space, Megan. But if you don't want me to record, I don't have to.
We'll just go with what we've got.
Okay.
I would just like to take a couple of moments if people start talking at the same time, we'll maybe go with the raised hand, or if I can see, I can see you. Well, I can only see half of you at a time, so that I got to toggle. But is anyone willing to share some of the thoughts they had in response to that prompt?
I think I'd like to be known for enabling my mentees to forge their own path and forge their own career rather than creating a bunch of mini-me's, if you will.
Ooh, I love that. Forge their own path. Thank you.
I'd like to be remembered as kind.
Kind. Thank
Yeah.
you. Chanel.
Yeah, interested. Just somebody who was actually interested in them.
Someone who's interested in them. And Chanel, I see your hand.
I think for me, I would like to be remembered as a mentor who opened doors for the people that came after her. Like I'm like the first person in my family to go to college and all that stuff. And so, I mean, it's like it's definitely something that I keep in the front of my mind whenever I have like an undergrad or anything like that, it definitely shouldn't be, ending with me. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? All right. Well, I think certainly we want to be remembered favorably, and as someone who supported the research development skills and identity of our mentees. And these are all things that I think could be valuable to communicate and be transparent to your mentees about. For our next section, I'm going to lead us through, I'm going to facilitate some reflection and discussion on the topic of creating an inclusive culture. And I should introduce myself. So I'm Megan Lamkin, and my primary role at UC is I'm the program director for undergraduate research. So I develop programs and resources that help students navigate the academic landscape in search of research, and to help them thrive in research roles, and also to help the mentors develop a mentorship practice that is productive and mutually supportive with their mentee. This section on creating an inclusive culture is one of 3 key strategies for effective mentorship. And it's a focal point that we use in our research mentor training, like the broader 4-6-week research mentor training. So again, during the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to guide you through a couple of mini reflections, and that's going to facilitate a broader discussion informed by the thoughts generated during your reflections. Please be reminded that as works in progress, working for an institution that is also a work in progress, work in this space can get a little bit uncomfortable, or it can get a lot uncomfortable. If you need to take a break, please take a break. Now, to emphasize the importance of this work, I want to remind you of the powerful position you hold. As research mentors, you influence who enters and who advances in research. And when I heard some of your reflections on how you want to be remembered as a mentor, a lot of you suggested things that involved mentoring the whole person, opening doors for people who might not have had doors open for them previously. And this reflects a strong intention to be inclusive in recruiting and advancing mentees, the future generation of research professionals. And we already know that as an institution, we aspire for inclusive excellence in all aspects of aspiration. In research mentorship, this means we aspire to provide equitable access to mentored research experiences. And it means we aspire for all who enter research to be provided training and psychosocial support that allow them to develop their research skills and research identity so that they may advance in research roles, so they can walk through the doors that we open for them. But how aligned is reality and aspiration? For this first 2-minute reflection, I ask you to consider, is there equitable access to mentored research experiences? How so, or how might it be limited? Are all who enter research provided the training and psychosocial support needed to develop research skills and research identity? Now I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes after we ease into this for another second, because first I want to tell you, you don't have to feel like you have to provide a comprehensive academic report in response to these reflections. Images, words, memories, feelings, thoughts might pop in your head. It doesn't have to be linear. It doesn't have to be described in a particular way. I just want you to observe yourself as you are reflecting on these questions. I'm not going to ask you immediately what your thoughts were or what you imagined. But after the next 2-minute reflection, we're going to ease into a discussion that is more purposeful and centered around what can we do to strengthen the culture of inclusion. Are there any questions before I set the timer? Any clarifying questions or anything? Any questions on some of the words I've been using, like psychosocial support or equitable access? Actually, I'm just trying to find my clock app, stalling. All right, I got a 2-minute timer set and the reflection starts now. Got 30 seconds. All right. Thank you for your attention to that reflection. Next, I'm going to guide you through a mini reflection on aspects of identity and how identity, or the composition of who we are, may influence how we engage in mentorship. show me a hand if you've explored aspects of identity using a diversity wheel. Okay, I'm seeing a couple hands. Okay. Various diversity wheels exist, and they are used to support reflection on different aspects of identity. From our fixed primary identities to other identities that are less fixed, but also grow out of our primary identities in that they are influenced by our life experienced through primary identities. The diversity wheel helps us realize aspects of identity that confer us privilege or not, and I'm talking about social privilege or not, as we navigate society. In our society, whiteness, maleness, wealth, ability, and heteronormativity confer the highest degree of privilege. In other words, the more aspects of identity we have, the more of these aspects of identity we have, the more we are socially accepted by people in positions of power. The more we are trusted and believed by teachers, employers, doctors, police, and other decision makers. If you have multiple of these aspects of identity, or you have all of them, it does not necessarily mean, well, it doesn't mean at all, that you had it easy, right? It doesn't mean that you had it easy. But for each privileged primary identity we have, we can intellectually guess what it is like to be in the oppressed group, but we cannot know what it is like because we do not live it. Those with primary identities that have been historically excluded, devalued, traumatized, and otherwise oppressed by the dominant majority, the dominant white male majority, the dominant white majority, may not feel physically or psychologically safe in spaces where they are minoritized. If anyone is feeling a lack of psychological safety now as we continue this reflection, you can turn off your anything and step out. The weight of experiencing an aspect of identity that is devalued can be so overpowering that it can cause us to not realize our own power, our own aspects of identity that do confer us power, if not privilege. So this brings us to our next reflection. All right, so in this space, most of us are going to have a combination of privileged and oppressed aspects of primary identity. Depending on where we lie in this composite of who we are, the oppressed aspect of identity can be overwhelming, right? So for those having that experience, the first part of the reflection is also about recognizing the privileged primary identity, but don't feel like you have to, okay? So for this 2-minute reflection, I want you to think about primary identities that you have that have been historically excluded and devalued in research. In experiencing your role in your space, do you feel physically and psychologically safe? psychological safety is essentially about being your authentic self without fear of damage to your career or reputation. And why or why not? For those with privileged primary identities, how do you or can you leverage that privilege to support those in groups that have been minoritized by the dominant majority? Are there any questions before I set the timer? All right, I'm gonna check the chat just to double check. I don't see any comments in the chat. Okay, I'm setting the timer. The timer starts now. Thirty seconds. All right, that's time. All right. Thank you for your attention to that reflection. Oops. Okay, so far, I have asked you to consider whether there is equitable access to mentored research, whether all who enter research are provided training and psychosocial support that allow them to develop research skills and research identity, whether you feel physically and psychologically safe in your role as researcher, as mentor, and for aspects of your identity that empower you or give you privilege. How might you leverage that privilege or power to support those in groups that have been historically excluded, but also we know face a barrage of invalidations and slights in the form of microaggressions? So as indicated previously, these mini reflections prepare you to engage in the broader discussion. I can't throw these big, heavy questions out there without giving us some time to slowly process how we think or feel about it. So as a first step in the question, I'm going to tell you where the discussion is going so you don't have to feel like you have to guess. It's going in two places. In the first place is, what can I or we as a group do to help generate more equitable access to opportunity? And what can I or we as a group do to help ensure all are provided the training and psychosocial support needed to develop research skills and identity? To ease into that, I want to open the floor currently for responses you're comfortable sharing in response to these first 4 questions. So before we can start thinking about what we need to do or what we can do, it's important to think about, where we are. What's our baseline? What are we doing well? So we can start thinking about how we can do better. So is there equitable access to mentored research experiences? And you can take this as in your space. Is anyone willing to share their thoughts on that?
I don't think that there is. And one aspect I can think of is the level of affluence you have. I've noticed that PhDs, MDs skew towards heavily affluent communities, because when you're in undergrad and you're usually expected to do a mentored research project, if you're trying to support your family, if you require working, 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs, you're not going to be able to forfeit your time and lost income to take those mentored opportunities. Same thing for PhD stipends. A lot of people financially just cannot ever hope to do it.
That was brilliant. Thank you. Anybody else on the first question? Is there equitable access to mentored research experiences? Thoughts, images, reflections, feelings?
I can tell you from experience, at least the one thing I will talk about is being disabled. It's definitely not equitable. I don't think at any level that I've ever existed at. So, yeah.
Yeah, it can be hard to know how to request accommodations, and then you can request accommodations and you don't know how they're going to be received. There could be just obstacles based on the lack of universal design in creating our buildings, infrastructure, and spaces, all right? Thank you.
A lot of times about how we write our job descriptions, we don't use inclusive terminologies. We're not reaching out to all the places that we could. Like for example, we've had some potential graduate students interview and they don't even have access to some of the basic research equipment, or it's so old that it's comical. Like, how would they even be competitive to join at a place like Children's or UC if they've never had access to good research?
Yeah, and I know even definitely in the lab space, even when they're redoing things, you'll make requests and you're told, no, that can't be done because it would mess with the building aesthetics.
I would add to what Megan said, even when they have opportunities, at least in my case in undergrad, we had opportunities to go to facilities that had, state-of-the-art equipment, but the culture at that place was so different than ours. A lot of our students did not feel comfortable going over there. And so, attitudes also keep people away from learning techniques and making use of equipment that would really help further the research.
Absolutely. And you hit on something so important. And that is that really having an inclusive culture is really about having a culture that's easy for people who are unfamiliar with it to adapt to and to feel like they belong and to feel encouraged. But Chanel, like you just said, going into that space, there are subtleties in body language and engagement and interaction that could signal maybe I don't, this culture is going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be challenging to break through and feel accepted. Thank you. How about the next question? Are all who enter provided training in psychosocial support that allow them to develop not only research skills, but research identity?
I think that our generation is one of the first to actually start to get any training in this. I think it's slightly bizarre to me that we're going to give people who have no teaching training, no business training, $1 million grants, and then expect them to go forth in life and be good with it. There's just a lot of learning on the fly, and it always doesn't shake out to be fair to mentees and mentors.
Good point. Chanel, I see a thumb up. Is that a hand up too to speak?
Oh no, I disagree with what Megan's saying. It's so sink or swim, not only with regards to the research training, but for the psychosocial aspect of it. I mean, you're pretty much told there are resources out there if you need them, but the attitude around the use of those resources is so outdated. I know a lot of students or mentees who don't seek support because they don't want to be perceived as weak or what have you, and it really affects the ability of them to do their jobs and to learn.
It's almost as if the emotional efficiency as an aspect of work is not factored into overall efficiency and productivity.
Right.
As, seeking that psychosocial or emotional support or is devalued, or even having those conversations are taking away from the functional or organizational or economical productivity of the work. When really, if we took care of the whole person and had a culture where access to those resources was encouraged and built into workload for everyone, if that level of protection was built in, more people would use them, and there would probably be more overall productivity in the space.
And Megan, I totally agree. I think that a lot of the graduate students, they all have to take grant writing courses and things like that. Like, what if we just had a 1-hour seminar on mental health, compacts, like all the things we're covering here today? Because, you know, I've been doing this for 10 plus years. Like, I could have used half of this a while ago.
I think one of the underlying issues there, Megan, and it's in your slides. It's in a lot of what you've said in the last 10 minutes or so, and that is the use of the word research skills, research identities, as if that's a border. You know, these things stop at that border. It only pertains to things that are in the research realm, where a lot, first of all, nobody, mentors, mentees, anybody, is capable of that kind of distinct separation. And often where the real challenges occur are outside of the lab, are outside of what we see in the classroom in a very narrow academic environment. But it's in those places where the psychological support is probably mostly needed and often most difficult to get.
Yeah, it's part of the whole journey. You're constantly developing in that identity. You're constantly developing different skills that you bring in, and yeah, it shouldn't be something that, you know, as soon as you enter the space, assume that you automatically have everything you need.
And I would dare say in some places, in addition to it just not being present, I've found there's sometimes an attitude almost against it, like, well, if you can't deal with X, Y, and Z, you shouldn't even be in this environment.
Right. Or what, and I see this, because my environment for most of my career has been medical students. You know, one of the most common things we have to remind medical students is when you get into medical school, life doesn't stop. Life goes on. And not only do you have to deal with medical school, your training there, you have to deal with life. You can't put it on hold until you're finished. And the same is true with research training, graduate school, fellowships. Is you're constantly juggling the more structured training environment where there are a whole lot of things you've got to bring in, but you also have to juggle that with life. And when people run into problems, it's a combination of the two.
Yeah.
I agree. I see Christelle's hand.
Yeah. Thank you. Christelle.
I was just gonna say, like, I completely agree with something that Leah just brought up with being told that, you need to be able to kind of just roll with the punches, or you should already be prepared being in this space. And, sometimes that can be very dangerous, especially when you come from a very unfamiliar background. Like for instance, like I went to a historically Black college and university, an HBCU. And it's like what Megan was saying earlier is like there's just such a lack of certain resources, even within like science labs, where I remember a particular science lab where all of the students were gathered around one little PCR machine trying to load some dye into lanes and being excited about, being able to do that efficiently versus like you come to grad school and it's like, you have to make your own gel. You have to, load samples. You need to be able to do all of these things. But it's like, if you come from that type of a background, and not all HBCUs, have such limited resources, and not just HBCUs, but, other institutions, some smaller liberal arts colleges, et cetera, also have like these lack of resources. And it can be very intimidating in a sense. And it could also so no, I don't think that there's enough training and psychosocial support for all the different types of groups. And the whole attitude, like Chanel was saying earlier, of like this sink or swim attitude, sometimes we lose a lot of people in these spaces because of that type of attitude, and also because of, their background and where they're coming from. Sometimes it's hard, to even try to navigate where to go about getting the resources that you're looking for. Like something that the current science policy group is trying to go on right now is that we're trying to have mental health resources for the actual College of Medicine, on our campus, because it's for me, I'm not ashamed to say I go to therapy, but it's hard when we were not virtual to have to leave lab or unless I had my sessions earlier. But it's if I had it in the middle of the day, it's hard to cut my experiments, get on a shuttle to go to the main campus, and then that's an hour, then come get another shuttle to come back, and get back into work. It's very inconvenient. And that's something that we're trying to work on, to have us to be able to have these resources more accessible to us, and even to know what these resources are and what's available to us. So yeah, I think that definitely needs to change.
I was just gonna say that's my same exact experience with using therapy on campus. To have to go to main campus when we're on, the med campus is such a pain in the neck.
I can't hear Chanel all of a sudden.
I think it censored her.
Oh.
Oh.
Go ahead, Chanel.
Oh no, what I was saying was I was agreeing with Christelle, because I also see a therapist here at UC, and it is such a pain in the neck to have to go to main campus in order to make use of those resources. And so when I tell other graduate students who I feel would benefit from that, that this is something that they should probably do, I always have that in the back of my mind about how they might not be able to make use of those resources because of the interruption it causes 2 experiments. And a lot of PIs don't, they're not really amenable to that. I'm fortunate that my PI understands. And so, it's not a problem for me. I definitely see where the hurdle would lie with, having these things set up the way they are.
So how amazing would it be if in the compact there was a section on mental health and it was co-created with your mentor? So you sat down and you discussed how you would manage mental health in a potentially stressful environment.
I did not think of that, but that would be a really helpful section to have, because for me, I was initially very afraid to go and talk to my mentor about having to take this time, on Wednesdays, and I have to leave the lab and then come back. But I mean, ultimately, my PI is more concerned about, my wellness than, an experiment taking an extra couple days because, it had to be interrupted. But like I said, I have a lot of friends that are in graduate school, and I am a rarity with my PI. It is not that common.
Chanel, you bring up a great point, and it makes me realize that graduate students will seek out these kinds of resources because they're useful to them and they need them. Often the PIs, the mentors, are oblivious not only to your needs, but the structure by which these resources are delivered. Many of them would not even realize that we don't have these kinds of resources on the East Campus, that it takes perhaps an hour in addition to your therapy session to get there and back because of shuttle schedules and everything else. I think that there is a need for mentors to be educated, not only about the needs, but about the structure by which these resources are accessed.
I agree. Thank you. We are now running short on time, which is fine, except I do teach at 3. So after we go through these next 2 prompts, I could hand it over to Laura or Jason or someone from the team to facilitate the last 2 questions. I would hate for you to leave today without thinking through steps that you can take as individuals or a group to what I'm going to call change the system. Now, this next prompt, do I feel physically and psychologically safe in my research role? I'm not going to ask you to share that right now. But if your answer to that is no, not really, then that deeply affects the degree to which you can leverage the power and privilege you may have to support the minoritized or oppressed groups. So it requires a degree of personal, physical, and psychological safety in your space, because now you're getting into advocacy and talking to people about changing policies and practices that that block your intention to create an inclusive culture. So we're going to skip to how might I leverage my privilege to support those in minoritized groups.
I think speaking up and supporting them is really important. I think too many times certain groups are, whether intentionally or unintentionally, victimized or made to feel left, and there's just way too many bystanders. So taking an active effort, not to help them on a basic sense, get into programs, get into research, but also make sure that your environment is conducive to them, working there and feeling like they have a safe space, a productive space, and that they're not singled out because of their identity.
I think finding, or like Megan Lamkin, you've started the program of the coffee and a conversation. So that way people who have questions, just like Jason said, you're not promising them a position in the lab, but at least giving them an idea of the culture and getting the conversation started. I've done a lot of those conversations and I've loved every student that I've had come through.
Yeah, so it really comes down to first being able to self-examine and ask yourself, what kind of learning and training do I need to be a better ally or a better advocate? And then looking to the activists on campus who are already working in that space. So for example, at UC, we have the Black Roundtable, which is comprised of student leaders from 25 plus Black organizations across campus. And the Black Roundtable put forward a list of demands to the UC president and provost in August. So how do you support the Black Roundtable? Well, I'm organizing, formally organizing a predominantly white majority to formally support, you leverage their influence to support these calls to action by the activists who have been doing the work all along. So far, the dominant majority groups have not formally organized to formally support the historically excluded groups. So I have to leave now because my next training program is getting started. I apologize, but the next two prompts, and I'll just leave them with you, are what can I do, or we as a group, to help generate equitable access to opportunity? And then what can I or we as a group do to ensure that all mentees receive the training and psychosocial support they need? And finally, I want to leave you with a document that was created. It's a summary of that I give to undergrads, what to expect as you're entering research. What does effective mentorship look like? It includes a list of, what dysfunctional mentorship could look like. And this is a new document. It's still a work in progress. And so I would like to invite you to review that with a critical eye and provide me any insight or suggestions you have for improving that document.
Is this the document? Just wanted to show you.
Yes.
Right, Megan?
It is. I do have to sign off. I apologize, everyone.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye.
And while she's signing off, if you take a look here, I did put it in the chat, everybody, but it was in the email that Megan Johnston sent to you. Does this look familiar from your email? If everybody could give me a thumbs up or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. And we know we're running out of time here. So let me go back to our slideshow.
So I'll actually, Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind backing up a couple of slides
Sure.
yeah, there we go. So in the interest of time, I think I'll help us finish out, but there's probably about 5 more slides here, but most of them are informational. So I thought that maybe we'd take the last couple of slides of these slides that Megan had left with us, the prompts.
Hey, Jason, this is Megan Johnstone. I was going to say our meeting is technically over at 3 p.m. So if anyone needs to leave, feel free. And those that want to stay on can stay on, because I feel like this has been a really good conversation.
Great.
So totally
Thank you, Megan. I'm glad you said that, because I wouldn't have known. So
yeah.
And we'll finish within 5 minutes. So if you want to stay on for the next 5 minutes, great. If you need to go, I certainly understand. What I'd like to do is actually just go through the next couple of slides that Megan Lampkin left for us, but about what we can do or what I can do to generate an equitable access to opportunity. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. I have never asked a group this question, so I'd love to hear your responses and what you think that we can do at the individual or at the group level to augment that equitable access to opportunities. Any thoughts there?
I'd like to point out, it looks like Susan has left and I think Carolyn has left, if that helps anyone.
For me personally, I try to seek out students that may be interested in taking the path that I did, and just providing them a source of information, like a repository of information. A lot of students with my background don't have people who have gone through this process before, and so it's very intimidating and very scary. since I've already navigated it, I like to offer my help, you know, for those who would benefit from just someone to tell them, you know, how a recruitment weekend works or things like that. Like one of the things I didn't know applying to grad school was that your accommodations for recruitment weekend are typically paid for.
Yep. Thank you, Chanel. I appreciate that because I think we often say or often hear that it's helpful to hear about situations or things that are new to us from people that look and sound like us. It gives us some level of comfort, and there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it's great that we can capitalize on your experiences and share them with others. That's a great way of helping with that equitable access.
Jason,
Anybody else has some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I will ask a challenging question as someone who is a white person. How can I ensure that I'm reaching out in an inclusive and fair way to other people that might not look like me? Like, I'm American, my accent is American, and you know, like, how can I do better? And I think that's a conversation we all need to think about. But if anybody
Agreed.
had
I think
tips.
that's a great. We may not get to all those answers today, but the fact that we asked the question and that we're willing to listen to some of those responses and have that crucial conversation, as we call them, those critical dialogues, are really helpful. Stephanie, can I have you go to the next slide for us?
Oh, Christelle's got some comments.
Oh, sorry.
Something that Leah brought up, I think I just keep piggybacking off of Leah's comments, was like, you know, mentioning the environment. And I think that it's not that there aren't opportunities and there aren't like people that can train, et cetera, but it's like, it's the one thing that where I feel like my career is leading towards is like, you know, we do a lot of like trying to include others. We do a lot of work with inclusion, but the thing is with like retention or like if you're going to like, you know, recruit people from diverse backgrounds, and that includes non-able-bodied individuals, it's like, do you have an environment that can actually like foster that these people to actually succeed? Do you have like an environment that can actually do the psychosocial support? Like, are there resources there for the individuals that we're trying to recruit? Because it's one thing, like there are people there to recruit, you know, and we have the trainees, we have the mentors, we have the opportunities, but it's like, what about the environment? Like, how can we do better to like work on those environments? Because I think that's how we lose a lot of people. You know, a lot of people fall through the little cracks of this academic pipeline sometimes, so.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing too. And I think you're totally right. What can we all do to do our best to help other people? And it's not going to be one person. It's going to be a large group of people, and there's going to be institutional policies that are going to have to change, et cetera, as well. So one of the last prompt here, what can I do individually, or what can we do specifically? Actually, go back one, Stephanie, if you don't mind. To help ensure that everyone is provided training and psychosocial support to develop research skills and research identity. Anybody have any thoughts on what we could, probably some similar responses to our last question, but.
I think it's important to include everyone on an equal level. And I'm going to kind of use an example. I've noticed groups I've been in, it's important to have focus groups for marginalized communities like women in this discipline, minorities in this discipline, but too often it seems like they're separate but together. I think it would be more helpful to bring everyone together rather than stereotype or marginalized an already marginalized community by, I'm using a very specific example, a women in computer science recruitment event I went to gave away pink computers, and the project was centered on creating wardrobe databases for a fashion runway.
Yeah, I hear the challenges that you with that. Very great. Other examples of things that we can do individually or as a group to help develop that really necessary psychosocial or psychological training aspect of things.
So one thing, and I think this, of course, especially since a lot of us that are in, either underrepresented or minority group, we aren't
continuing to train.
Oh, sorry. I probably had two people. Go ahead. Christina, I heard you.
Yeah. So I mean, I know that I think any of us that are in an underrepresented or minority group can say that, we aren't really in a fully safe environment. And one of the things that I know, especially because I started in science, 16 years, I'm like about a 10-year ahead of most of the trainees. There weren't really any visibly disabled people. And as I've, part of the reason I'm sort of sticking my neck out, and being more open about being disabled is I'm kind of forced to, because I'm losing that conditional privilege as I become more disabled. But for those that do feel safe and are able to make yourself aware, because there are more, disabled people, there are more, LGBT plus people. But if you have your mentees or other potential mentees, somebody, if they don't know that you exist, you can't be there to let them know that, hey, that you are a safe person to approach and talk to, and maybe give them ideas of what worked for you and what didn't work for you, things like that. And
Thank you.
I intersectional, like a lot of us overlap.
Thank you. And I saw your comment in the chat about intersectionality as well. And I think that's something that a younger population probably appreciates more than some of our faculty do at times. But we have lots of different identities. And you use the word visible, which I really appreciate, because some of us are visible minorities and some of us are invisible minorities. And we can be both. And that matters. And we have to as we feel comfortable, to express ourselves and perhaps provide examples to others as we see comfortable, right? As we maintain our own sanity and psychological safety as well. So thank you. I appreciate your input. I think we'll, in the interest of time, I'll just go the next couple of slides. I think we can go through. Stephanie, I'd like to end on maybe one more slide. I forget there's a questions in here. And then there is just a friendly reminder from me. Stephanie will say this as well, but there is a form that we ask you to fill out in REDCap. It's a very quick evaluation that gives us some much needed feedback on what works and what doesn't work, or what we could change for the next time. It's very quick, so please provide us with that input. It is anonymous. And then finally, I'll just, actually, Stephanie, I think this is for you to say, so I'll shut up now. Sorry.
No, Jason, go ahead. I think this leads well into our upcoming workshops that you're all welcome to sign up for. I just bolded the one that we are going to be offering to you next. I hope you have it on your calendars, and it's the one for conflict management, difficult conversations, which, I mean, it's a perfect lead-in for where we are at this point. So sorry to keep you for a couple, are we at 10 minutes? Sorry to keep you 10 minutes late, but if you're not a member of CCTST, I do want to let you know how to register. Is everybody a member, so that you're getting our CCTST emails, so that you know when these team science workshops are available to you? Can everybody unmute, or may I unmute you?
I will spout off that. Yeah, I'll share that we do a variety of workshops. I highly recommend registering them. I'm not just biased on my end, but we cover communication, crucial conversations, conflict management, mentorship, and they're also 2-hour workshops. But if you have suggestions for an area that you're interested in, we're more than happy to start doing some research.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we have references for today's workshop as well. And then our team science resources are right here as well. But at the end of the feedback, survey, I included this particular website, cctst.org, right to our team sciences. So you'll see a lot of these resources on our website. So if you want to click on it, that says, thank you, CCTST, or from CCTST team science faculty. Let me go ahead and put that. Since you're not sure and you want to register as a member to make sure, yep, thank you. Thank you, Cope. Thank you, Christina. To make sure that you do get those member emails, because it's free, and you get grant workshop. There's all the types of different information. You can't go wrong getting these emails, let me tell you. And I know I'm a CCTST person. However, you will definitely won't regret getting the emails that you receive, and there's not too many. But we do have an events webpage as well that you can always look at to see what are upcoming events and workshops and all different kinds of children's as well as UC events coming up. But if you register, you will definitely get them in your email. And yes, I stopped sharing, so yes, I will go back. Sorry, Laura. Any questions?
Thank you guys for coming today. For those that aren't in the CCTST, you can go ahead and log off. And those that are, if we have time, we can do a quick debrief.
Yeah.
Thanks
so
everyone.
much for coming today. Any last questions, comments?
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Have a great day. Stay well, stay safe, and please stay warm.
I think we're alone.
I'm standing up because my butt hurts.
I know.
Thank you for sharing, Jason.
Jackie, that was a good one.
You guys did a great job. Fantastic.
I really like how Megan's section turned out. And Jason, your section was really informative. I think you got a lot of people thinking and talking.
And Megan Lampkins too. Gosh, that just led into the difficult conversations.
You know, it made